like Israel, or all the prophets had El at the end of their name. And Kal in Hebrew means the vessel of God. And I think that what Jerry Siegel was doing, he grew up Jewish, and I think what he was doing was giving us, playing with us a little bit. And the vessel of God comes down. What does the story of Superman in the Bible remind you of? A story from the Bible. Somebody sending off their only child, putting them out into the river of space, and somebody finding them and adopting them as their own. What is that the story of? Moses. The story of Exodus. Well, I would suggest to you that the destruction of Krypton is the story of Genesis, and the story of Superman being floated out in space and being picked up and adopted in the middle of Kansas is the story of Exodus. There's also one more clue. There are a lot of clues on Superman being Jewish. But anytime a name ends in the word man, whether it's Silverman or Cooperman or whatever it is, that person is either Jewish or a superhero. But the fact that I tell you that he's Jewish doesn't mean that lots of other religions don't claim him. If Superman is the story of Moses, what's another way to see this story of somebody sending off their only son sending him to Earth to rescue mankind, to show mankind that it can be better than it was? What's that? The story of Jesus. So Christians, there have been entire books written on how Superman is the story of Jesus. And there are religious school classes taught by Methodists, and taught by Catholics, and taught by ministers all across America that talk about Superman being Christian. But those aren't the only people who have adopted him. Buddhists think that Superman is the perfect Zen-like character. Who could be more Zen than Superman? Atheists think that Superman is the perfect secular hero, the secular messiah. Everybody loves Superman enough that everybody can invent a credible story on why Superman is just there. So Superman has become a story that's part of our folklore in religion, in popular culture, in everything from TV and radio to comic books and graphic novels. What I would love to do, though, now is stop talking and take questions. I spent 2 years wandering around the country interviewing 200 people, the people who started Superman, the people who wrote his TV and radio stories, all kinds of things. And I'd love to answer any questions that you have about Superman. Any questions?
You mentioned the memoirs. Is there any way to get a hold of, for a typical person like me to ever get a hold of that?
That's a good question. Lots of great stuff was released. If you really care about Superman and want to dig into his history, the best trove of information that has ever been out there is all the stuff that came out as part of the Superman lawsuit. And the way to get the memoir and the way to get any of this information is the lawsuit was filed in California. There's a federal district court in Riverside, California, that has all these documents. And if you can't find it online, look for it, get in touch with the court. If you can't find it, email me, and I'll help point you a way to get the memoir.
Just for this. Why wasn't Superman Returns successful enough to merit a sequel? It breaks my heart. I think it's a love letter to Superman in the Richard Donner movie. Why don't you think it merited a sequel? Why isn't it successful enough?
I thought that, without any offense to Chris Reeve, we're having a book party for this book on Monday when I get back to Boston. And Christopher Reeve's two brothers, his father, his whole family is going to be there. And I think Christopher Reeve was brilliant, but I also think Brandon Rouse did a really great job. And I thought that was going to start a whole new series of movies, and so did Warner Brothers. And there's only one reason. What it did at the box office was it never brought in the brilliant Richard Donner movie, broke box office records back then, and it surpassed all the expectations of Warner Brothers and the Salkins when they produced that movie. And it's simply a matter of money. Brandon Rouse and Bryan Singer would have had a whole new series of Superman if it had done better at the box office. And now they're going to try again with, what's the guy's name? Henry Tudor's Kevin, the actor. And we'll see whether they can get another franchise. What worries me more than any of this is whether Superman continues to have a history, continues to have a future, if Warner Brothers and the heirs to Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster's family can't figure out how to divide it up. And right now, as those of you who follow the lawsuit know, different elements of the character either belong to Time Warner and Warner Brothers or to the heirs. And I can't remember. The case, I think, is the heirs, and the flying is Warner Brothers, and they've divided up. You can't take a character. It's like the famous biblical story, who are they trying to divide up? And that's the only way to save the baby is to save the baby, not try to divide it up. And I hope we get a settlement sometime soon, where that movie that comes out next summer will be the last time we have a movie on Superman. Other questions here? Yes, good question. So we talk a lot, and everybody always talks a lot about Jerry Siegel. And Jerry Siegel wrote this long memoir telling us more than many of us might even want to know about all that he did. And Joe Shuster was always his quiet partner. And he was the one who intrigued me more than Jerry. Jerry had a very facile pen and a loud mouth, and he was going out and telling the story. Joe was the guy, and I talked to lots of Joe's family members, including his sister, and he was the guy who was always the quiet guy and sort of got dragged along with what Jerry wanted to do. And the good news was that Jerry wanted to do Superman, and he got dragged along with that. The bad news was that when Jerry wanted to sue DC Comics, and then sue them again, and then sue them again, Joe always sort of got dragged along with that. And I found the evidence, as part of the book research, that Joe Shuster was actually trying to do a deal with, I think it was with Harry Donenfeld, who was one of the original owners of DC Comics, that Joe Shuster wanted to branch out and do some other interesting things. It was tragic because, as you all probably know, the worst thing that can happen to an artist is that they lose their eyesight or they lose their dexterity in their hands. And Joe was losing both. He was going blind, and at the end of his life, he had a very difficult time seeing it all. And over the years, his hands had some kind of palsy, and he had a really difficult time drawing. So as an artist, he was losing the basis of his trade, and as a human being, he was getting sucked up in all the things that Jerry wanted to do with some of Jerry's angles. And I wish we had had a chance to see what Joe could really have done if he were freer to operate on his own. He's a really interesting story, and that was a good question. Any other questions? Neil.
I had an opportunity to get a review copy of your book, and one thing I wanted to ask you about was the entire process of taking the original Superman movie to the top. There were some pretty eye-opening things in there that you had written about the entire process. And first meeting all of Father, who elaborate on some of those eye-opening things for the people.
Anybody who knows Neil knows that he's a diplomatic guy. Eye-opening is a modest way of saying there were some shocking things that turned out after the film, and some really perilous things. And we're talking about the original Christopher Reeve movie, and some of the crazy things that were going on. The guy who was directing the film, who was Richard Donner, hated the guy who was producing the film, who was the Salkin, father and son. Salkin, Alex Salkin and his son Ilya. They hated even more a guy named Pierre Spengler, who was sort of their money guy who was watching things. So you have a creative guy over here, and the money people over here, and they think, the money people think that Donner is spending too much money. Donner thinks that the Salkins and Spengler are thieves, and both were a little bit right. Donner was spending a lot of money because he wanted to make a great film, and he did. The Salkins were sort of these crazy, not quite thieves, because they managed to pull it off, but they were as close to a Ponzi scheme without being a Ponzi scheme. They would raise money. I think if we went and looked at the actual percentages of the film, we'd find out that the Salkins might have sold about 200% of that film, because everybody had a little share in some with them. But they were real characters. One of the only people favorite of all these. They say about Superman that your first Superman, the first time you ever saw him on the screen, big screen or little screen, is the one you fell in love with and liked the best for the rest of your life. And my favorite was the one that I grew up with as a kid, which was the original TV Adventures of Superman, which is why I think it's brilliant that they have a statue down here of Noel Neill. I think it's brilliant that Larry in the back of the room here wrote this terrific book, which if you haven't seen, you ought to, on Noel Neill. And I think it's great that Jack Larson, Noel Neill, is still alive and doing pretty well, and that George Reeves' memory goes on. Any other questions here? Questions? There's nothing for you.
One final question, and that is, you were talking about the concerns over the lawsuit, different people owning different pieces of the legend and all this stuff. I remember the years after Star Trek, the original TV show had been off the air a long time, but before the first movie came, you know, there's a whole bunch of them now, but it was years before the first movie came, and the word we got on the street was Hollywood was afraid to make it, and the fans just rallied and held things just like this for years, and finally it happened, and now there's a whole bunch. Do you feel, notwithstanding all the legal things and all these other things going on, Superman being one of the most well-known popular characters on Earth, that fans alone can keep him intact regardless of the way the lawsuit goes?
I'm an optimist, and I believe the fans will insist that Superman be around, and I also believe that they're going to settle the lawsuit. The saddest thing to me about this lawsuit is, so the heirs of Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster filed a lawsuit, and Jerry has already died. 6 months ago, when did Jerry's widow die? When did Joanne Siegel die? Sometime in the last year, she died. Joe Shuster's only really close surviving relative is his sister, and she's had a stroke and can barely talk, and she's not going to be around for a long time. So by the time they settle this lawsuit, it's going to be much more distant heirs, and the lawyer who was filing the lawsuit who are going to get all the money. And it's sad to me that if it was going to be a lawsuit and they were going to try to have restitution for having bought Superman from Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster for how much money? $130. Having bought it for $130. The idea that they'll probably get tens and maybe hundreds of millions is a nice thing, but it would really be nice if somebody was around who was a part of that originally. But I think the fans are going to ensure that this happens. We see the same day that my book is officially out, which is next Tuesday, June 12th. What else is happening in Superman's life on June 12th? A movie is coming out. The animated film, Superman versus the Elite. And that is coming out. DC and Warner Brothers are committed enough to do that. They're making a new Superman movie. They understand. If they don't understand the justices, giving something, and I think they've made some quite reasonable offers to the heirs, they understand that they've got to get on with Superman and continue making money because people love Superman. And I think he's going to go on long beyond the time that anybody in this audience is alive to watching him. There'll still be Superman. Great. Just two more and then we'll wrap it up.
You talked about the original TV show that was your favorite when you were a kid, and that Jerry Siegel, he had a choice in his youth of what inspired Superman from his father. What is the best way nowadays to get the young kid interested in comics? Do you think there's anything but the original TV show in the old serial?
I despaired of that when I started writing my book. I knew I cared about him, and people like me with gray hair or no hair cared about him, and I wondered with the new generation. And then I started watching what was going on. In my hometown every year, they have a huge Halloween party in the afternoon, and the only thing that touched Superman in terms of costumes was Spider-Man. And I actually started counting Superman outnumbered Spider-Man. And I wondered where these kids picked up their interest in Superman. And it was partly Smallville, it was partly the Terrence, it was partly just something about the story. I believe that the story that Jerry Siegel partly accidentally landed, that was such a brilliant story, and the way that's been fine-tuned, I think that people would be idiots if they didn't come out with new TV shows to get kids interested, and the movies will do it, the film out this summer, the film out next summer. If there's this groundswell, people who are trying to make money off it, you don't have to worry about that. They're going to keep coming out with new ways. And I think it's going to go on. And where was the Is his interest entirely based on your interest, or where did he pick up from?
I always watched Smallville, and when we had him, I wanted to like Superman. We got into old animated Superman, or the TV shows are 15 minutes long as that. He loved it.
So it's Smallville just went off the air. When did it go off the air? Yeah. So I don't know for a fact, but I can assure you somewhere in Warner Brothers Studios, they're already working on what the next incarnation was. That was so much more successful than they ever dreamed it would be. It lasted, was it 9 years like him, who were coming along and doing it. So they'll do it. They'll be back with it.
One more question for me. Speaking of dramatic departures from the traditional Superman, there's the Lost Superman movie, the 1998 Superman Lives, that was supposed to be Nicolas Cage as Superman and Tim Burton directing, and Superman dies and is reanimated as a robot, and it's a black suit with glowing lights and no cape. Is this, I know that the movie was supposed to exist and then it kind of self-imploded, but do you know anything in detail about where the movie came from, why it was never made?
There have been books written on that in terms of looking into all that, and I don't pretend to be the expert. I do recall at some point seeing a script of it, and I may even have one somewhere, but I think it imploded for lots of reasons in terms of having the wrong producers, and having, I know that Nicolas Cage was nothing in his life other than he ended up earning a lot of money on it without doing any work on it, because it never was made. But I know he would have loved to have done it, and do you know any more about what happened? I thought that was going to happen.
The only thing I know is that it's an old expression, too many cooks spoil the stew, and that's what was going on with that movie. They were trying to make... Oh.
I was just going to add to it. I know that after quite a number of years of just constant, never actually being able to get to move forward, Nicolas Cage, in an interview, said that it had just been too much time and he had basically removed himself from the project. So, and I'm sure, I would hope a lot of people would agree that I'm very thankful that the movie never was made, because, I mean, can you really imagine Nicolas Cage playing Superman? I mean, you got to see him with Ghost Rider, and that didn't make you want to call your eye. I can imagine Superman.
By the way, one of the things that does, watching how many cooks and the difficulty of getting it done, makes me have more respect. One of the craziest guys that I've ever met, and strangest interview, which was going to be an hour interview and turned into 5 or 6 hours, was with Elias Sulkin, who was a producer of the Chris Reeve Superman movies, and he is a really wacky guy. And he got to the point where his girlfriend, who was with us having dinner, at the end of 2.5, 3 hours, she excused herself because she was tired of hearing him talk, and I wanted to hear him as long as he was going to talk. But it gives me new respect for what they managed to pull off. These two European guys who came in and didn't really understand Superman, and they pulled off 4 movies, and they got, with help from Richard Donner, Chris Reeves, who was as perfect a Superman as I think you could ever find. And it's just the idea of, with all of those crazy cooks that they had in their kitchen, but they produced a product as good as that is really something. So I think this is probably the last question here, Greg.
Question is, the writer that brought Superman out of the closet, is he still with DC Comics and Viz? Why? I spoiled his whole image.
Run him out of the closet and explain that. I'm sorry.
Nobody's gay.
Superman?
Yeah. The writer brought out that they're supposed to be gay and all this stuff, and brought him out of the closet.
Yeah, I know Green Lantern's story about being gay. I never knew. That's something, if it's true, I'll have to go back and revise my book. Anybody know anything about that?
That rumor came about a couple of years ago, and what it turned out was supposed to be about Brian Singer's, how can I put this politely? There was rumors going around Brian Singer's gay, so that's why that rumor went around. But that thing has never been proven about that.
Well, actually, Brian Singer is openly gay, but I think that I've never heard anything about Superman being gay, and I don't think that that's likely to ever happen. one thing on the Green Lantern, but I think that the controversy that I've heard about is Superman's nationality. It was at some point when he was going global and the UN gave him, was there actually a comic book where he renounced his American citizenship? But I think Superman is to the world an all-American hero, and I think that's probably a good note to end on here. And if anybody is interested in the book, it's back here. I'm going to do some signing. And I just appreciate all of you coming out on a hot day like this to hear about a new book on Superman.
I was just going to thank everybody also, and like Larry said, it'll be signing books back here. 11:30, if anybody's interested, right over here at Dippin' Dots, we're going to be holding a meet and greet for the Superman Super Site. We'll be giving away quite a few animated releases from Warner Brothers and quite a few other prizes from local merchants. So if anyone wants to come over there and hang out with us from 11:30.